They were the towering legends of Hollywood's golden age. Men who seemed larger than life, dominating the silver screen with confidence, authority, and style. But what audiences didn't know was that some of these giants of cinema were shockingly short in real life. Behind the glamour, behind the camera, Hollywood studios went to astonishing lengths to hide one of the industry's best-kept secrets, the true height of its leading men. The golden age of Hollywood, stretching from the 1920s through the 1960s, was built on illusion. Painted backdrops passed for exotic destinations, doubles risked their lives for dramatic stunts, and stars were carefully packaged to look flawless to the public. But among all the tricks and deceptions, height remained one of the most closely guarded details. In an era when masculinity was equated with physical dominance, shorter actors risked being overlooked for major roles. If the audience sensed that a star wasn't tall enough to play a heroic figure or a romantic lead, his career could collapse. And so, the studios developed elaborate strategies to keep the truth hidden. This wasn't a small adjustment. It was an industry-wide operation. Directors instructed camera operators to film from low angles that made actors look taller. Set designers built hidden platforms, while costume departments created suits with vertical pinstripes, high-waisted trousers, and shoes with discreet lifts. Cinematographers used shadows and lighting tricks to elongate an actor's frame, and casting directors often paired shorter leading men with even shorter actresses to disguise the difference. It was a carefully coordinated system, and for decades, audiences were none the wiser. Today, we'll pull back the curtain on 12 beloved stars whose commanding presence masked their surprisingly modest stature, and reveal the ingenious methods Hollywood used to keep the illusion alive. 1. Alan Ladd. Alan Ladd was one of Paramount's most bankable stars of the 1940s and 50s, remembered for films like This Gun for Hire and the classic Western Shane. On screen, he seemed every inch the tough, heroic leading man, but in reality, Ladd stood only about 5'6", and some who knew him privately claimed he was even shorter. The studio quickly realized that if audiences ever focused on his stature, his career might be finished. So they engineered what became one of Hollywood's most famous illusions. Ladd was paired repeatedly with actress Veronica Lake, who stood at just 4'11". Their on-screen chemistry was undeniable, but casting her also had a practical purpose. She made him look tall without camera tricks. When Ladd shared the screen with taller co-stars, the production team got creative. Directors ordered trenches dug for men like Jack Palance to stand in during Shane, while Ladd himself stood on hidden boxes, nicknamed Ladd boxes. With low camera angles, vertical pinstripes, and shoes built with hidden lifts, Alan Ladd was transformed from modest in stature to towering in presence. 2. James Cagney. James Cagney exploded onto the screen with a ferocity audiences had never seen before. In films like The Public Enemy and White Heat, he projected raw intensity and seemed larger than life. Yet off-camera, Cagney stood only about 5'5", a height that could have been a major obstacle for a leading man in the 1930s and 40s. Warner Brothers refused to let his stature hold him back. Instead, they engineered clever solutions. Publicity brochures inflated his height by several inches, often listing him at 5'9". Cinematographers adopted what insiders called the Cagney angle, a subtle, low shot that gave him an imposing presence without drawing attention to the trick. Directors also used blocking to their advantage, seating taller actors while Cagney stood, or staging confrontations on staircases to disguise differences. But what truly made height irrelevant was Cagney's energy. He moved like a coiled spring, with rapid gestures, bouncing footwork, and sudden outbursts that filled the frame. His explosive presence made audiences forget about inches altogether. As one critic later observed, Cagney didn't need to be tall. His energy made him seem unstoppable. 3. Edward G. Robinson. Edward G. Robinson was never tall, but you wouldn't have guessed it watching him command the screen as ruthless gangsters and tough-talking detectives. At just 5'5", Robinson hardly fit Hollywood's idea of a dominant leading man. Yet in films like Little Caesar and Double Indemnity, he created characters so intimidating that audiences assumed he was far more imposing than reality suggested. The trick lay in how directors used him. Robinson was often positioned behind desks or at the head of a table, forcing taller actors to stand before him like subordinates. Cinematographers favored tight, low shots that magnified his presence, while wardrobe designers emphasized dark suits and crisp tailoring to create sharper lines. But Robinson's real weapon was his voice. He projected every syllable with clipped precision and a nasal force that seemed to fill the room. Critics later noted that his smaller stature may have actually added to his character's menace. Here was a man who had to fight twice as hard to dominate, and the result was unforgettable intensity. As John Huston once remarked, Robinson didn't need height. His voice alone made him 10 feet tall. 4. Mickey Rooney. Mickey Rooney was one of the shortest major stars in Hollywood history, standing just 5 feet 2 inches. Yet for much of the late 1930s and early 40s, he was MGM's biggest box office draw. The Andy Hardy films and his musical pairings with Judy Garland made him the face of all American youth. His boyish looks, boundless energy, and comedic timing made his stature seem like an advantage, at least while he was playing teenagers well into his 20s. The challenge came later, when Rooney tried to transition into more adult roles. MGM's technical departments sprang into action. He wore custom-made shoes with 3-inch lifts, stood on raised platforms, and was framed with careful camera angles that minimized comparisons with taller co-stars. Cinematographers even developed lighting tricks to elongate his shadow and give him a more commanding silhouette. What set Rooney apart was his adaptability. When he could no longer hide his height, he embraced it, often using the contrast with taller actresses for comic effect. He once joked, "I'm not a tall man, but I stand among giants in this business." And judging by a career that spanned over 80 years, he wasn't wrong. 5. Humphrey Bogart. Humphrey Bogart is remembered as the ultimate tough guy, the cynical private eye in The Maltese Falcon, the world-weary romantic in Casablanca. On screen, he projected an aura of strength and control. But in reality, Bogart wasn't nearly as tall as audiences believed. Official studio biographies often listed him at 5 feet 10, yet most accounts place his real height closer to 5 feet 8, with some claiming he was as short as 5 feet 6. Once Bogart graduated from supporting roles to leading man, Warner Brothers worked hard to keep the illusion intact. The most famous trick was the bogey box, a small platform he stood on during scenes with taller co-stars. It was used constantly in Casablanca, where Ingrid Bergman, at nearly 5'9", could easily have towered over him. Directors also staged their scenes carefully, keeping Bergman seated or positioned slightly lower whenever she appeared beside him. Cinematographers employed low angles, elongated shadows, and subtle lighting tricks to enhance his frame. Even Bogart's trademark posture, a slight hunch and tilted head, helped disguise height differences. What really mattered, though, was his presence. As director John Huston once said, "When Bogart walked into a room, you felt it before you saw him. That can't be measured in inches." 6. Dustin Hoffman. Dustin Hoffman emerged later than the Golden Age, but his story shows how Hollywood's approach to shorter leading men evolved. Standing at just 5'6", Hoffman faced the same skepticism that earlier stars like Alan Ladd and James Cagney endured. Yet rather than conceal his stature entirely, directors often used it to enrich his characters. In The Graduate, Hoffman's modest height became part of the film's dynamic. Playing opposite the statuesque Anne Bancroft, his smaller frame heightened the sense of vulnerability and nervousness in his character, Benjamin Braddock. Instead of hiding the contrast, director Mike Nichols leaned into it, making it a source of psychological tension. Throughout his career, Hoffman wore discreet lifts and benefited from more sophisticated camera work than earlier eras had allowed. But he also embraced roles where his size worked to his advantage. In Midnight Cowboy and Kramer vs. Kramer, his underdog presence made audiences root for him even more. Hoffman himself once remarked, "I think I was lucky being short. It forced me to develop other qualities." And that's exactly what he did, turning a potential setback into a defining strength. 7. Danny Kaye. Danny Kaye was a whirlwind of energy, a comedian, dancer, and singer who lit up the screen in the 1940s and 50s. Audiences were often too dazzled by his rapid-fire delivery and physical comedy to notice that he wasn't especially tall. At 5'7", Kaye was shorter than many of his leading ladies and often dwarfed by taller male co-stars. Studios still gave him a little help. Raised platforms and carefully chosen angles were used in his romantic scenes, ensuring he could play the charming lead without the distraction of height differences. Costume designers emphasized vertical lines in his wardrobe, giving his frame a lengthened look. But what really made Danny Kaye's stature irrelevant was his movement. He was constantly in motion, dancing, flailing, pulling faces, bursting into song. His frenetic energy filled the frame and distracted the eye from any physical shortcomings. He even used humor to address it. While filming White Christmas alongside 6'3" Bing Crosby, Kaye joked, "Between us, we average out to the perfect height." It was classic Kaye, self-deprecating, charming, and larger than life in every way that mattered. 8. George Raft. George Raft became one of Hollywood's definitive gangster figures, exuding a cool menace in classics like Scarface and Each Dawn I Die. On screen, he looked every bit the dangerous tough guy, but in reality, Raft stood only about 5'7", hardly the towering figure audiences imagined. To maintain the illusion, Warner Brothers employed every trick in the book. He often wore suits with sharp pinstripes and high-waisted trousers that elongated his frame. Hidden lifts in his shoes gave him an extra couple of inches, while cinematographers shot from slightly below eye level to enhance his silhouette. Casting directors also surrounded him with actors of similar or shorter stature whenever possible. What truly made Raft intimidating, though, was his stillness. Unlike explosive performers such as Cagney, Raft conveyed menace by doing very little, standing perfectly still, letting his eyes deliver the threat. That composure made him seem coiled and dangerous, even when taller men stood beside him. As one critic later put it, Raft didn't need to loom over you. His silence and his stare were scarier than size could ever be. 9. Sal Mineo. Sal Mineo rose to fame in the 1950s as one of Hollywood's most sensitive and magnetic young actors. His breakthrough came in Rebel Without a Cause, where he played opposite James Dean and Natalie Wood. Mineo's youthful vulnerability made audiences sympathize with him instantly, but what many didn't realize was that he stood only 5 feet 6 inches. At first, this actually worked in his favor. His smaller stature reinforced his roles as troubled teenagers, making him look younger and more fragile on screen. Director Nicholas Ray even used the height difference between Mineo and Dean in Rebel Without a Cause to emphasize his character's need for protection and belonging. As Mineo grew older, though, his stature became more of a challenge. Like other shorter stars, he turned to lifts, camera tricks, and carefully tailored suits designed to elongate his frame. His signature pompadour hairstyle also added a few extra visual inches. Still, Mineo occasionally let his height show through, especially in roles where vulnerability was central. Though it may have limited his later career, his intensity and emotional honesty gave him a presence that far outweighed his physical size. 10. Sammy Davis Jr. Sammy Davis Jr. was a true showbiz phenomenon, a singer, dancer, comedian, and actor who could do it all. His charisma lit up every stage he walked onto, making him one of the most versatile entertainers of the 20th century. Yet in person, Davis stood only 5 feet 3, one of the shortest stars in Hollywood history. For film and television, Sammy relied on some of the same tricks as his contemporaries. Elevator shoes that added 2 or 3 inches, carefully chosen angles, and smart blocking when he appeared alongside taller co-stars. His towering pompadour hairstyle added even more visual height, but Davis didn't let stature define him. On stage with the Rat Pack, he often leaned into the joke, firing off quick one-liners whenever Dean Martin or Frank Sinatra poked fun at his size. In one performance, he famously quipped, "I may be looking up at you physically, but musically, you're looking up at me." That was the magic of Sammy Davis Jr. His talent was so immense, his energy so magnetic, that audiences forgot about inches entirely. As Sinatra himself once said, "Sammy may be short, but in talent, he's a giant." 11. Burgess Meredith. Burgess Meredith is best remembered today as the gruff boxing trainer Mickey in Rocky, and as the Penguin in the 1960s Batman series. But long before those roles, he had built a reputation as one of Hollywood's most respected character actors. Standing only 5 feet 5, Meredith never had the conventional height of a leading man, yet he carved out a career that lasted more than 6 decades. What made Meredith stand out wasn't camera tricks or costume illusions, but his sheer craft. When a role called for authority, directors used the standard techniques, elevator shoes, low angles, or raised platforms. But Meredith's true weapon was his voice. Resonant, precise, and capable of filling a room, his delivery gave him an authority that no extra inches could provide. Unlike many shorter actors who relied on explosive gestures, Meredith mastered subtlety. His posture was perfect, his movements economical, and his performances tightly controlled. This restraint gave him a quiet power that commanded the screen. As one critic later remarked, Meredith may have been small in stature, but he was incapable of giving a small performance. 12. Frank Sinatra. Frank Sinatra's reputation as one of the most magnetic entertainers of the 20th century often made fans assume he was taller than life. His voice, his swagger, and his sheer confidence filled every room he entered. But in reality, Sinatra stood just 5'7", and some biographers suggest he was even slightly shorter. Hollywood handled this with the usual toolkit: custom elevator shoes that added 2 or 3 inches, low-angle shots, and careful blocking in romantic scenes with taller actresses. When paired with women like Mia Farrow, who was 5'9", Sinatra didn't shy away from the height contrast. Instead, he leaned into it with supreme self-assurance. What truly made Sinatra's stature irrelevant was the way he carried himself. He believed he was the most important man in any room, and because he believed it, everyone else did too. As director Gordon Douglas once put it, Frank had something far more important than height: presence. That presence, combined with his legendary voice, ensured that Sinatra stood taller in the world's imagination than any tape measure could ever record. Looking back, it's remarkable how far Hollywood went to protect the image of its stars. Entire departments were devoted to the illusion of height. Set designers built hidden platforms. Cinematographers perfected low-angle shots. Publicists inflated bios with a few extra inches. Even costume designers became part of the conspiracy, crafting wardrobes to lengthen and slim their stars' frames. And the truth reveals a double standard. Male actors were expected to project strength and dominance, which meant height had to be disguised. Meanwhile, women were expected to appear delicate and smaller than their co-stars, often selected precisely because they wouldn't overshadow a shorter leading man. These illusions weren't just tricks of the trade. They reflected Hollywood's rigid ideas about masculinity and femininity. But ironically, the very actors who seemed most at risk of being exposed went on to create some of the most unforgettable performances in cinema history. What's striking is how many of these stars turned a supposed limitation into a defining strength. James Cagney's explosive energy, Humphrey Bogart's quiet intensity, Edward G. Robinson's commanding voice, and Frank Sinatra's sheer confidence all became trademarks of their screen personas. Their talent and presence carried more weight than height ever could. So, what do these stories really tell us? That true star power isn't measured in inches, but in presence, charisma, and the ability to hold an audience's attention. These 12 men, from Alan Ladd's Hidden Trenches to Sammy Davis Jr.'s elevator shoes, remind us that the magic of Hollywood has never been about physical perfection. It's about creating a presence so magnetic that people can't look away. Which of these stars surprised you the most? Have you ever noticed the subtle tricks used in your favorite classic films? Let us know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this dive into Hollywood's hidden history, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more videos uncovering the secrets behind classic cinema. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.